The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have another fantastic episode for you today, but before we jump into it, let me just take a minute to remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com, for all of our episodes, a news feed, as well as a merch store if you want to support the podcast. But until then, let's get into it. So today we have Steve McBride from Touché. Steve, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. Like you said, I'm Steve McBride. I'm a Director of Quality here at Touché Lighting Controls. A little bit about myself. I started with Touché back in 2017 as the Technical Support Services Manager, overseeing the technicals aspect of our company, along with the outside startup and commissioning of projects. In 2021, I moved into my current role as the Director of Quality. So I've been doing that here since. Before that, I spent 8 years working for a large commercial general contractor out in California, really dealing with the startup and testing of building systems. So kind of been around the lighting controls ever since then.
So I feel like there's a lot of people who are like, wait, what does that job do? So do you mind just telling us what your role is?
It's exactly what I was going to ask.
No, that's good. So, as a Director of Quality, I oversee, making sure we have a quality product and a quality experience for our customers from the very beginning stages of, interactions with engineers and, our representatives to, drawings, helping out to make sure we have our details that make sense and are, pertinent to the contractors. So, it's an easier experience for them, all the way through production, manufacturing test jigs, making sure we're following our testing processes, all the way to the completion of how did the project go in the end and what do we need to work on to make that a better quality experience for everybody.
So, yeah, I mean,
so a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and I would say that, there are definitely groups out there that don't have a Director of Quality. In fact, I would say it's an uncommon role to have, from my perspective anyways. But I think it's an essential role because, especially when it comes to lighting controls, having that quality experience, which is the term you used, is really critical to a successful project. You can't just dump product on a project and go, okay, that was a good project because we sold a lot of money, or we sold a lot of product and made a lot of money. So having that follow through in the end, and okay, what worked, what didn't work in that project, how can we move forward and improve upon that? That sounds like a really important thing to do.
It is. And, like I said, we spend a lot of time focusing on that. I mean, occasionally I'll even go out and do, with my past experience, I did a lot of, on-site commissioning and things like that as well. So I'll go out to job sites even now and say, okay, let me get the real world experience of, our product and the install and everything to make sure it's up to those standards. So you're right. It's not a super common role. And it's actually something that, through the course of working with Touché, it was, we really saw a need for it. And it was like, well, let's make that happen. So we actually created the role instead of having it filled,
Yeah.
I'm curious how that works out with end users. How do you go about getting in front of end users? We've all heard the stories, and we've talked about it multiple times about how, engineers are really good at making something or making it pretty per somebody else's spec, but it doesn't always work the way in the field because the engineer knows this button, this button, this button in this order to make the sequences happen, whereas the end users just press buttons, right? So how do you go about getting in front of the end user to be able to make sure that you're providing a quality experience and then tweak your product accordingly based on that feedback?
So, yeah, and there's kind of there's kind of, I would say, two varying levels of end users that we kind of, like I see as because we don't install the product, right? So I
Right.
see, the contractors install it as an end user of it, and then also the true end user of the building, right? So, we have a lot of conversations. We work with a lot of the same contractors repeatedly. They're very used to our product, but we have a very open and honest dialogue with them of, what went well, what didn't go well, what changes in the app you would like to see, what features, to try to, get their real world feedback. On the end user side, that's a little tougher because a lot of times when we're done with the commissioning of a project, they maybe are just moving in, they don't have their full staff in there, so it's really hard to get in contact with that end user. A lot of times we'll have our reps, 6-8 months down the line, reach out to us and say, hey, can you guys give us, some training with the end user and how the product works, how to use their system, how to make changes. And we're 100% always on board with that, because that's how we continuously make ourselves better.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that there were two types of end users. Do you mind going into a little more detail on that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's probably more, but really, we look at everybody that touches our product as an end user at some point, right? And somehow they're going to have to use our product, and it's just how they're using it. The EC is using it by installing it. He wants it to be, fast to install, easy, without any issues. The end user wants it to work. So that's a big
Sure.
one. I really see those two groups as, different end users, but of different types.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a good distinction to make because of the fact that you have knowledgeable technicians working with the equipment first, and then you have the true end users, the people who are just day to day with the equipment, who may not even understand the back of house process for
Mhm.
getting to where they are with everything. A lot of lighting controls are very complex and require knowledgeable staff to be able to get started up. But once it's started up, you may never need to touch that software again. And as a result, you
Yep.
just have people who are pushing buttons to turn lights on and off or dim them. So as a result, I think that's a really good distinction to say there are two types of end users regarding lighting controls. And so, how do you approach a startup tech versus a true end user?
So when you say startup tech, are you talking about like our technicians or an installing contractor?
I mean, I think that's also a really good distinction to make here. So, actually, would you mind just telling us what the difference is between a contractor and your startup tech?
Yeah. So, I mean, our, our product is sold, and then, sold through our reps and distribution channels and things like that. And it ends up in the hands of an installing contractor. So they'll install our components, do all the connectivity, the Cat5 cabling, connection to fixtures, 0 to 10, and hopefully do some preliminary configurations. We have an app that is extremely easy to use. We have website tutorials and videos and how to use it. So we really try to encourage that. So they'll install it and get it as far as they can, and then our startup and commissioning techs will either work with them remotely to help get it completed as far as any final configurations, or our technicians will go to the site and help them get it completed. We promote the remote portion of it just because it's cheaper for everybody, and with our with some of the technology we use, being able to remotely access people's phones and see what they see, we can guide pretty much anybody through configuration of our system.
And I think, Ron, you can attest to that. Doing remote startup and guidance to the contractors has really helped a lot of projects.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a huge benefit for us too, ourselves, right? And I see that as a benefit for any organization, whether you're a manufacturer or an integrator or a dealer or even a rep, right? I mean, if you have that service offered as a rep, right? Anytime you can remote into a system, it saves you on labor resources. It saves on a potential service call. You can react to the customer faster, right? A better customer experience, a better customer response. you can't always fix the problem, but you can at least try or get closer. And the more you can get, have that remote access and gain that ability, you can do a lot. Or assist a technician on site when needed. It's very possible you may have a technician on site who hasn't experienced the specific problem, but if you have a more advanced senior tech who can dial in and assist, that's a huge benefit too.
No, 100%. And we see a lot of the value in it too of, addressing what we see as a very big problem in the lighting control industries is getting the projects done, right? We're graded on 100% of the building being functional, not 95%, not 98%, right? And, typically the way the industry has gone is that, we have an on-site technician that comes out and does the startup. Well, that's booked out 3+ weeks in advance, and things happen. And when, that person gets there, they can't finish because there was a water leak in the other room, or the painters were in there. They couldn't put fixtures in, or so being able to remotely access them and help them through that last, percentage and actually get the project complete is of immense value.
So anyways, back to the question regarding how you approach like a technician or a contractor. Really, I mean, you have the technicians that you're working with in house, but with contractors versus true end user, is there like let's say for instance a contractor reaches out to you for guidance versus an end user, is there going to be a different approach there with the lighting control solution that you're going to be providing?
A different approach? I wouldn't say a different approach. I mean, we're going to give everybody the same level of quality, and service that we can. They're looking for different things at that point, right? Like the EC reaching out or us reaching out to them, they're really looking to how do we install it, right?
Right.
So, we take the same approach with them, jumping on, pre-wire meetings, Teams calls, going over the product with them. Versus an end user, they're looking for configuration changes and things of that nature.
Yeah. And so just to make sure that we capture that term that you used, pre-wire meeting, do you mind just finding what that is?
Yeah. So it's a loose term. People use it for all sorts of different things, right?
Yeah.
In Touché's world, we believe that, in order for a project to be successful, we have to get in front of it. And so, we'll have a pre-wire meeting where we'll go through all of their drawings specific to them, how our components wire up, their bill of materials, how to access the resources they need, if it's drawing questions or application questions on how does the app work. We kind of guide them into the resources so they have all the information they need to be successful. In some cases, we take it to another level. I wish we could do this for all our projects. We can't, but for a lot of them, we'll send out a technician early on, and instead of doing a remote like pre-wire meeting, we'll have them on site and say, let's install one room of this control, and we'll go through and make sure everything looks good, you understand it, because last thing we want to do on these big projects is just start building upon bad habits. And then we get to the end and we got a big mess we got to fix. So that's kind of how we see pre-wire meetings.
No, I think that's really interesting. And I mean, what you're talking about in that special condition is something that I would refer to as a mock-up, so that it's something that the end user can interact with it and understand what it is that they're getting. But I think it makes sense to at least do it before grabbing the entire scope and just running whole hog towards it. Because as a result, one of the things that we hear from a lot of designers anyways is that the owners might not know what they want. And so as a result, they might get into the space when it's completed and go, what is this? What am I doing here? And so as a result, I think that is a really good solution to that challenge. And so if I'm a designer, what do I want to do to ensure that I have a pre-wire meeting?
Well, if you're a designer or an engineer, a lot of the engineers we work with, it's in their specs where, they require an on-site pre-wire meeting or, so that's a way to guarantee it, regardless of whether or not, it's in in a spec or not, anybody could call, us at any time and say, hey, I'd like to have a, pre-wire meeting. Can we set something up? And we'll 100% go over it because, even though we may not have money in there for this remote pre-wire meeting, the headaches it's going to save us on the back end is so much worth it.
Sure.
Yeah. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but Webster, I just want to clarify something. I think what you're talking about is more front end sales, whereas what Steve's talking about with his pre-wire meeting is really post sale, right? He's talking about once the job is sold and, contractors on site or about to, they're on site, so.
That's a very good distinction. Yeah. I mean, a pre-wire meeting from a design side, as Steve said, you're right. It does go right into the specs, and it's only something that is expected to be done after the project is purchased by the contractor, or some kind of contractor is already involved in the project. Whereas I'm not going to have a pre-wire meeting before contract documents get issued.
Right. But having that, I mean, there's huge value in having that pre-wire meeting on site before the contractor gets released to really installing all these systems. And to Steve's point, as the manufacturer, to make sure they have a full understanding on how this goes, because there is nothing worse than showing up on site to commission or configure a system and start programming to find out that the entire thing was wired incorrectly. All these Cat 5s were done wrong. They were terminated incorrectly. There's any number of issues you could come up with. So anything you can do to get out in front of that, and whether that's a manufacturer or a rep or an integrator or whoever's there on that front line, having somebody out front in any project, regardless of manufacturer, right, and that front end before installation is worth every dollar.
No, 100%. We've seen great success with that. And like I said, I wish we could do it with every project. We really encourage our reps to, do that as well. So that's something we push pretty hard. And like I said, we've seen some very good success with that.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, let's say, for instance, I'm a designer and I want to start a Touché lighting controls design. What would be my first step?
Well, I think with any lighting control project, I think the first step is we got to have some sort of understanding of what you want it to, how you want it to work, right? Sure. And that's, I think, sometimes easier said than it actually happens or is done.
But we've heard many people with heartburn for that and not having a clear intent, for sure.
Yeah, having that clear intent is key. And then if it's like, hey, I want to design my project around Touché. I mean, we have a great, project engineering team that plethora of details and Bluebeam blocks and CAD tools that, we freely will give to people and help them guide them on the system. I mean, we have some engineers that we work with that they're not lighting control experts, but they know that, hey, I want 4 zones in this room. And they'll just say zone 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll take that document and we'll lay it out for them. And then go, here's your drawing back. And they go, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
And I think that definitely reflects on a lot of what people have said when it comes to documentation, is that a clear intent is worth way more than a flimsy layout. And so if they, just say, I have these zones, this is what I expect for them to be controlled, that manufacturers can at least take that and come up with a solution to meet that intent. Whereas if you're just showing devices on a drawing, that really doesn't help communicate much, at least anymore. No. It may in the past, but nowadays it really doesn't.
No, it really doesn't. And that's, that having that ambiguity, if you have it, just trickles down to the end. Because like you said, then the end user is like, how does this work? And nobody really knows. Right. And it's not how they wanted it because that wasn't communicated up front.
And so your preference would be, if somebody were designing a Touché lighting control solution, is to not necessarily show every single device that is required for the system, but rather, okay, these are the zones, this is what I want for the control solution, maybe some presets or buttons that they have in mind, but not necessarily saying, this is exactly where I want this device to go, at least at front. I'm sure the confirmation of location is still critical after the design is created, but you really can't do anything if you just see a keypad on a wall.
Yeah. I mean, I think preferred, I'm not saying preferred one or the other. I mean, we'll take both, right? I mean,
Sure.
We have some engineers that are like, no, I'm going to put every device exactly where I want it. It's like, okay, go for it,
Right.
But yeah, that's, I think that just offers some flexibility because like we know lighting control systems can be complicated, especially in, certain areas. And, I got 4 zones of control, but I got, daylighting and emergency, and it kind of just starts building on itself that if they just give us the intent, we can go, okay, here's what you need.
Sure. So then let's go to the other end of that. I'm an end user who's had a very dissatisfying experience with Touché lighting controls. What do I do in that situation?
So if an end user has a not good experience with Touché, I think the first thing I would say is, reach out to us, because we take that very personally, of making sure, everybody is satisfied in the process. And, we have had that happen. People reach out and, after we're done 6 months later, and they're like, this isn't working. What's going on? And, as we peel back those layers, we see that, one, they don't fully understand their system and how it operates. And what is operating properly in their mind is wrong, because it's not how they expect it to happen. So we'll work with an end user. We offer free lifetime technical support. So if anybody has a problem, they can call us and we'll work with them to, make these changes. The good thing about our system is we have a very, very low SKU count in our product. But that doesn't mean we have low capabilities. We have many get out of jail free cards.
Can I have you explain what that means, a low SKU count?
Yeah, so we don't manufacture a lot of products. I think, I have to double check. We have a handful of switches, right? Now those switches can do everything from a single function where you press it, it turns the lights on, press it, turns it off, all the way up to a large touchscreen that you can put 10 scene buttons, 32 zones of control. So we have a low SKU count and like I said, a low product count, but the capability is there where we can do anything we need to. It just depends on, if somebody says, hey, I want 12 zones of control on this switch instead of 4, we say, okay, well, you need to go to this different switch, but the connectivity is the same, the controller is the same, the app's the same. So it really minimizes any impacts of changes or configuration updates in the future with an end user.
Sure. So
I'm go ahead.
Go ahead, Ron. No, go ahead, Ron.
So I'm curious, as we start talking through design process, right? Before we jump back to end users, I'm sort of curious. We ask a lot of people who we feel is responsible for the lighting controls design. I don't want to ask you that specific question because as a manufacturer, I think we might be able to get a little bit more data here if we ask you who you tend to hear from more regarding design.
I think the answer would be who you ask in the company, right? But I'll tell you from my side, right? Who we hear from the most about design is probably the end user, to be honest with you. And it's not quite design at that point. It's, they call and they say, I don't want this room to be occupancy controlled, or I don't want this room to be vacancy controlled, or I want to change my schedules, or after hours, I want my lights to behave a certain way, right? So they have a lot of say in my mind in their project because they deal with it at the end of the day, right? Upfront design, I mean, it's really the engineer that'll put out, his design and the sequence, or his or the sequence of operations, or the control scenarios. But at the end of the day, it's really dependent on the owner if that's what they want.
Interesting.
Does that answer your question?
It does. No, it's interesting because you put a different spin on it. Like, okay, you mentioned the engineer, which I'm not shocked. You get a lot of calls from electrical engineers more say than lighting designers. I understand that. Makes a lot of sense. You put an interesting spin on it by adding the end user. Because they're, like you said, they're not calling you on the upfront for the design, but at the end of the day, once a system is installed, they're the ones who are operating it. So the design, as many cases, kind of shifts and changes based on how a facility is being utilized.
Oh, 100%.
I think the other thing here, though, the added variable that maybe you created, Ron, here is the fact that we never really defined design for lighting controls.
That's true.
And so, when we talk, at least I'm making an assumption here on your behalf, Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we're talking about lighting controls design, we're not talking about just general guidance. We're talking about how does this device connect to that device? What dimming protocols are you using for your luminaires? That sort of level of design. And so we're talking about construction documents for the purposes of design build projects. Who is responsible for those documents?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But he did put an interesting spin on it by mentioning.
No, totally. I would actually make the argument that in all projects, the designer in that definition is the end user because they're the ones who are going to be using it. It's like asking.
And
Go ahead.
It feeds back to other conversations we've had, and I know, Steve, you haven't been privy to some of these conversations, but conversations we've had with other people is regarding how important it is for the designer, whether it is the electrical engineer or a lighting designer or a controls designer, to engage the end user early on in discussions about how they want the system to function. How do they want the buttons to look? How do they want them to feel? What do they want them to do? And engage those discussions early, which really does involve the end user, right? More so that you don't have all of this on the back end, or have an end user who's not 100% thrilled with the experience and what they're having because they weren't included in those discussions early on.
Yeah. No, that's 100% the way it should be.
Yes. And so, I think that also lends credence to your claim of a low quantity of SKUs, because all of the work, for the most part, is in the software. It's not hardware dependent. There are obviously limitations to hardware, but there are companies out there that have hundreds of SKUs, and if you order the wrong SKU, you're locked out of features. And so that is sort of one of the nice benefits of a low SKU number. It does limit what you have to offer in certain capacities, but to that point, if you don't know what the end user wants at the start of the design of the lighting control system, you're a lot more flexible to be able to respond to those expectations later on in the game.
Yeah, and I think we took the approach with the low SKU count, and I think that's something we're trying to get people to understand. Because you mentioned something that maybe made this pop in my head, is that just having the low SKU count doesn't mean low capabilities.
Right.
Like our expansion modules that we sell that connect to our controllers, you can set them to daylight, plug load, regular channel followers. We can set them in all sorts of different software configurations to meet the end user or the project's requirements. So the low SKU really just lets us be agile on what we can offer.
Right. And I would say that the only real limitation there is the aesthetics of the product itself. When it comes to how it looks, what kinds of finishes, etc. But if the product that you have, which I've seen the products that Touché has, I find them quite attractive. But it really depends on that personal. Sure, it depends on that personal approach, though, and I think that
Yes.
is sometimes where lighting controls live or die, is how their switches look.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a very important factor, and we have everything from very basic control switches to very sophisticated switches. And we hear this feedback. We have a 2-button switch that some people either love or they don't. Like there's nobody in the middle, it seems like. So we said, okay, we understand the market feedback, so we're developing a much more sleek, modern looking switch that can be used in its place if that's desired. But yeah, we do try to keep the SKU count low, but you're right, that could, we may not have something to fit everybody's aesthetics.
And so let's say, for instance, I wanted to use a different keypad. Let's say it's just a contact closure keypad. Would I be able to integrate that into a system?
A contact closure keypad, no. So all of our switches use, well, no, with a caveat. I'll get there. So all of our switches, right, use we have active communication back and forth between the switch and the controller, right? So a contact closure wouldn't fit in that application. One of our controllers, our room manager, does have digital inputs that we can use to, interface with third-party devices, anything with a dry contact. We can take that and make it control the room.
Sure.
So yeah. So yes and no.
So there is integration capabilities with that, but it's not going to be for every single application. You're going to, in that particular instance, you are hardware dependent.
Yes, in that instance, yeah, somebody can't take somebody else's switch and plug into us, and we wave the wand, it works.
Right. But again, I think that's a much more European style of lighting control design than a North American style of lighting control design.
Yeah.
To be able to ad hoc a system, which is something that we've talked about on this show before. But so I mean, you're using a proprietary system for your switches to your processors.
Yep, 100%. Now we do a lot of interfacing with AV systems, shade systems, theatrical control systems through DMX. So we do a lot of integration with third parties, just with different devices that we have to be that bridge.
Now, from a manufacturer standpoint, what does the integration look like on your end when you are integrating with third-party groups?
So it's different, I think, based on the type. AV integration is usually really straightforward. We use RS-232 to integrate with AV and shades, right? Very common protocol for the two. We made our interface very, very flexible, where we don't have a predefined set of commands and syntax structures that we have to deal with. We can send and receive any printable ASCII character, right? So it makes integration a really simple process, where it's, we'll talk with the integrator or the end user and say, okay, well, what do we want it to do? We got to define the intent first, right? And let's say they want to mirror our switch, right? We'll make some very simple strings through our mobile app, where, we say, when you send us the word high, we're going to trigger the high scene. When we hit a button, we're going to send you a string that says high status, so we can keep each other in sync. So it's a very seamless process for the AV. Shades, for the most part, I would say, is the same. It seems like AV systems usually have an integrator or somebody who is more familiar with making that connection between the two of our systems. Shade systems, they're usually very structured, and this is the exact string you have to send me. to make my stuff go up and down. So either of them are completely doable. It seems like the AV one is a lot of times more straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious how, where you guys do your own startups, you have your own technicians. How do you handle that that startup and that integration with a third party? Whether it's an integrator like me or somebody else. How do you work with those third parties, and then how do you work that out on the front end? Before as you're selling the project and you're looking ahead, and you know that there's going to be shades, there's going to be AV, there's going to be DMX. How are you looking at that? Because a lot of times what we see, unfortunately, when you've got 3 or 4 manufacturers on a job, everyone has a hard line at where they stop. And that handshake can be very difficult if there's not a third party who's going to say, I'm going to own this and I'm going to make sure that you talk to you.
Mm-hmm. And that can be difficult because, like you said, if you have that third party that owns it, it's a lot easier, right? We approach it of, if we're going to a job and we know it has, AV integration or DMX interfacing, we'll try to reach out to those people ahead of time and let's talk shop on what strings we're going to send back and forth. If DMX, what channels or addresses would you like me to use? And we'll get that set up front. So when our technicians are on site, they can configure it, because getting the 2 people on site at the same time seems to be a problem.
Yeah. Yep.
So, whoever's there, we'll try to, we'll get it configured in that aspect. And then, if we're not on the same site at the site at the same time, that's where, with the use of our remote support, we can help the AV integrator or shade integrator troubleshoot, get the strings set, make any tweaks to, the configuration as needed. So yeah, I mean, generally the connection between the 2, we work it out is because we don't know what they are, right? I mean, we're a standard DV9 on our RS-232.
Yep.
So, we'll say, hey, use this connector. You're an RJ11. Here's the connector you need to get. Plug us in, and we're good to go.
Yep.
Well, we're almost out of time here, but I just want to summarize, because this is all great stuff. I think, again, Ron and I, we talk to a lot of people. We don't often get to talk to the people who are ensuring the quality on the manufacturer side of stuff. So to really chat with you about the goals and operations of the manufacturer, in your case Touché, is really interesting, because I think every manufacturer does operate in their own way, uniquely to each other, at least in North America. And that does, there's pros and cons to every way that they approach. But I think, from your approach, at least from Touché's approach, there's a holistic focus on the success of the lighting controls now and in the future, and using that lens of what happened in the past and to build upon that, as well as the fact that you're trying to really create a simplified design process, at least from that minimal SKU format, so that there's not a huge amount of guesswork when it comes to which product am I using for this application. It's very streamlined. And then when you get into the programming, that's when decisions really are made. And those decisions are not locked in place. They're much softer. And additionally, because you have a lot of work with integration of other groups, and you have this remote capability for supporting the startup through its programming, you have this ability to not necessarily have to fly a tech out to a site to make sure that it's going to work, which really is a great resource, and probably cuts down on the overall cost of the project because of that. Additionally, the way in which you are trying to focus on not just the true end users, but the end user being the contractors as well, really leverages them as an additional customer rather than a resource of the company, which kind of is in contrast to what we've heard before, where the contractors are a team member of the manufacturer rather than a customer of the manufacturer. And I don't know if that's necessarily me misinterpreting what people have said, but at least that's what I've inferred. And so, I think it really is an important thing to focus on the fact that the people installing this are just as important to the end user experience of your product as the people who are pushing the buttons on a daily basis. And so, finding that way of creating a clear intent, but not necessarily so precise that you're locked out of features, um, really helps that process as well. And so it's really fascinating to hear about the process that you guys employ here. But I don't know if I missed anything, if you wanted to add anything else to that, but that's what I've taken away from this episode.
No, I think you recapped it very nicely.
Well, good.
That's awesome. Well, Steve, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today. It's great, to hear how focused you are on the customer, and if everyone takes away even just a few things from this, from a holistic approach, regardless of what manufacturer you're using, hopefully it's Touché in this case, right? But if it's not, pre-wire meetings, huge. Having early conversations with end users, contractors, designers, and then the idea of remote access. Not every manufacturer offers it, but there is a ton of good that can be done with remote access. And if you're thinking about project and project design, remote access, as far as I'm concerned, should be one of the things at the top of the list that drives you towards a manufacturer, or at least considers, towards a manufacturer, because what that can do for you as a designer or the engineer to help project success, and as the manufacturer or startup technician on site, and then from the end user down the road to be able to call and just say, I don't like the way this is working, or my sensor isn't doing what it's supposed to anymore, and having 5 minutes to log in and take care of that without spending thousands of dollars to fly someone out is absolutely huge. So thank you for that. I truly appreciate that. And I know it's something I wish every manufacturer offered. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So
No, yeah,
just
thank
wanted,
you guys again.
absolutely. So I just want to take a minute to remind everyone that today's episode was presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We've got all of our episodes, a newsfeed, and a merch store, as well as wanted to make a brief shout out about the new NAILED committee that Ron and I have started up on startup technicians. Definitely check it out, especially if this episode perked up your ears and you're interested in startup services and what technicians do on site. We are doing our best to raise awareness for this really critical role. So check it out, or send us an email if you're interested. But otherwise, until then, thanks so much for joining us. And Steve, really appreciate you joining us. This was an awesome conversation.